This is our chassis, and this is the Tim Cross Electronics YouTube channel. Welcome back to the workshop. I'm glad you could join us today. Today's going to be a fun day. We get to work on the chassis today. We've already got all of the pilot holes drilled out on the chassis, and the next step is we need to make the base plate. Now, most of the circuitry is going to be mounted directly to this plate, and then this plate will be secured into the chassis. The reason that I've done this is because normally when you build an amplifier, you just bolt the circuit board straight into the chassis. Well, that's fine if it's an amplifier because it's sitting inside of a head cabinet and you don't have to look at the bolts poking through the top. But when we're working with a pedal, we don't want to look down and see a bunch of screws sticking up, and we certainly don't want to end up stepping on them. Okay, here's the problem with using a base plate to mount our electronics. The base plate is going to be secured to the chassis with the rivets that are holding the tube sockets in place and the shaft of the potentiometers. Because we've got these screw heads here, these screws are going through the base plate and they're going to be securing our terminal strips or turret strips, whatever we end up using, we end up with a gap here. So what we need to do is we need to actually bend this base plate around these screw heads. So here we've created a relief where these screw heads are, and that eliminates any gap between the base plate and the chassis. And the way we're going to create this relief is by first threading the screw into the base plate, and then we're going to stick it in a bench vise and fit a socket over the end of the screw, and then as we tighten the bench vise, it's going to push on the screw head and force this base plate into the opening in the end of the socket. And this is what we'll end up with. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so now I've got my base plate drilled, and if I line it up with the chassis, hold it up to the light, I can see they're pretty close. There's a couple spots where I'm off, maybe a tiny bit, but it's not going to be a problem once I get the holes enlarged here and I'm ready to mount everything. I think this will be just fine. So now I've got to take this base plate and stretch out these mounting holes into a dome shape. Okay, so yesterday I went and got a piece of sheet steel cut down at a metal fabrication house, and I just had them cut me one piece because I thought, well, what could possibly go wrong? I'm just drilling holes in a piece of metal. Well, it went horribly wrong. This is the first one that I did, and I don't know if you can see it here, but these holes, I just was too aggressive with stretching the steel, and they tore out quite a bit. So I've got a new piece of steel here. I've marked all the holes in this, and we're gonna give it another try. Gotta make sure this time that I get the socket dead center on these screws. Otherwise I'm gonna end up with trouble again. Much better this time. That is perfect. Look at that. That's beautiful. We've got just the right amount of relief in the steel here. So now these screw heads are sunken into the steel. We're not going to have any problems with mounting this once we've got the circuit board and everything else attached to this. Now we don't have to worry about bolts sticking up through the top of the chassis where we're going to be looking at it on the floor. None of that. This is going to look beautiful. Here's our chassis with our mounting plate installed. Now what I've done here is I've put the mounting plate in here and tapped both pieces together with a 632 tap. And then I've actually screwed this mounting plate to the chassis. You can see the screws coming through here. The reason I've done that is that now when I go to drill these larger holes, I can drill them both at the same time, and that will make sure that all the holes match up perfectly. They're all the same size. That'll make things a little bit easier. Well, I got most of the holes drilled. I had a lot of trouble drilling the holes for the tube sockets. Turns out that this is the world's worst drill press. So it just didn't have enough guts to get through these larger holes. So I'm going to have to finish those with a hand drill. Not a hand drill. I mean, you know, a handheld power drill. I wouldn't do that. So I've gone ahead and test fit some of the components in here. I've got some terminal strips and tube sockets and a couple of potentiometers just to make sure everything fits properly. I did have to file out a couple of the holes because the screws weren't quite making it through, but everything seems to be going together quite nicely now. And the next step is we have to open up a hole in the back panel for an IEC socket and another hole for the output jack. We're going to do that in the next video. So that's it for today. Like it if you like it, comment and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.